The wind howled with a vengeance, ripping through the ancient enclave, as though it sought to tear apart the stones themselves. Rain lashed the earth, each drop falling with the weight of foreboding, a tempest stirred by forces neither mortal nor divine. Beneath the relentless storm, Selene's body trembled, not from the cold, but from the truth she could not escape. Her child lay motionless in her arms, fragile as porcelain, her faint heartbeat the only sign of life in a world determined to snuff it out. Selene's hands were stained with blood, her own, her enemies', and now her daughter's. The birth had nearly killed her. The child, born of forbidden bloodlines, was not supposed to survive. The elders had called her a blight, an omen, a crack in the fragile balance of their warring worlds. They had warned Selene, pleaded with her, cursed her when she refused to listen. Yet here the child was, small and silent. Her existence a question the world was not ready to answer. Beyond the thick stone walls, chaos reigned. The storm carried the cries of battle, of wolves and vampires locked in a war as old as memory. Their hatred had been carved into the bones of their kind, etched into the earth with every drop of spilled blood. But tonight, their war was not fought over territory or pride. It was fought for the child, the impossible union of their two cursed bloodlines. The keeper of forbidden knowledge was the only one who could unravel the child's curse, or seal her fate forever. Selene stared down at her daughter, her eyes searching for answers in the infant's delicate features. The child's face was serene, untouched by the storm, by the bloodshed, by the prophecy that had condemned her before her first breath. Selene whispered her name, barely audible over the storm. Mira. It was a name filled with hope, a name that defied the darkness clawing at their world. But even as she spoke it, doubt coiled around her heart like a serpent. Could hope survive in a world so intent on destroying it? A crash of thunder shook the walls, and the heavy door of the enclave flew open. Adric stood in the doorway, his armor drenched, his eyes blazing with urgency. He moved toward Selene, his steps heavy with the weight of the night's horrors. "We have no time," he growled, his voice low and jagged. His gaze dropped to the child, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Fear, perhaps, or understanding. "The Magus is waiting." Selene clutched the child closer, her arms tightening protectively. She had heard the whispers of the Magus's power, of the rituals that demanded a price too steep for any mother to bear. But she also knew the alternative. If the child remained as she was, cursed and powerless, she would not survive. The wolves would come for her, the coven would cast her out, and the world would devour her whole. "What will he do to her?" Selene asked, her voice trembling, yet firm enough to demand an answer. Adric's jaw tightened, his silence speaking louder than words. He turned, motioning for her to follow. The storm greeted them with unrelenting fury as they stepped outside, the wind nearly tearing Mira from Selene's grasp. Adric led the way, cutting through the storm with a determination that bordered on madness. Behind them, the enclave burned, the flames clawing at the sky like desperate hands. The journey to the Magus felt endless, each step heavier than the last. Selene's mind raced with fragments of prophecy, half-remembered warnings from ancient texts, and the whispered fears of her own people. "She will be the end of us all," the elders had said. "Her blood is a curse, her power a plague." Yet none of them had seen her as Selene did now, not as a threat, but as a child, her child. At the edge of the forest, the Magus stood waiting. He was neither young nor old, his face shrouded in shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. His presence was a weight upon the air, heavier than the storm. His eyes, black as an abyss, fell upon Mira. And for the briefest moment, a flicker of something passed across his face. Pity? Curiosity? It was impossible to tell. Bring her forward, the Magus commanded, his voice deep and resonant, cutting through the storm like a blade. Selene hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to turn back, to run. But where would she go? There was no safety, no sanctuary for a child like Mira. Slowly, she stepped forward, her legs trembling beneath her. The Magus extended a hand, his fingers long and skeletal. "She is not yours anymore," he said, his tone devoid of warmth or cruelty. It was simply a statement of fact. Selene's breath caught in her throat as the faint glow around Mira began to intensify. The Magus's eyes narrowed, his hand hovering over the child as he murmured words in a language older than time. The storm seemed to pause, the wind and rain holding their breath as the ritual began. Silver light spilled from Mira's tiny form, illuminating the darkness with a brilliance that was both beautiful and terrifying. "What is she?" Selene whispered, her voice breaking. The Magus did not answer. His focus was on the child, his voice rising as the ritual reached its crescendo. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air grew thick with power. Mira stirred, her tiny hand reaching out as though she could grasp the storm itself. Her eyes opened, and for the first time, Selene saw them. Not the eyes of a child, but of something far older, far more powerful. And then, as the storm roared back to life, the Magus spoke the words Selene had dreaded above all else. "She will decide what remains." And so, the Magus's words hung heavy in the air, a verdict not of clarity, but of uncertainty. Selene's heart clenched as she clutched her daughter tighter, the weight of his warning carving itself into her soul. Outside, the storm raged on, as if nature itself recoiled from what had been set into motion. Yet, even as the winds howled and the night swallowed their cries, one truth remained unshaken. Mira's fate was no longer hers alone to bear. It was a question, a challenge to a world unprepared for what she would become. But the storm was only the beginning, for with each passing year, the whispers would grow louder, and the burden she carried would only deepen. What happens when the powerless begin to awaken? What would you do if you were in Selene's position, holding a child destined to shape the fate of the world? Let us know in the comments below.